Hello,
Hi,
Miss
Miss Seward.
Seward.
It's Hazel,
And Emily.
and this is our podcast. Okay, so we are going to focus on perspective. Well, you already know that, but we're going to talk about perspective, which in IB focuses on like authors and readers and characters and their perspectives and the ways that they like work together to form like our interpretation of a text.
And we're gonna focus especially on Nyasha, who is our favorite character. And she's the best. And yeah, so she's really like has a lot of different perspectives. She's like seeing all these different cultures as she like goes throughout her life and like moves to different places like England, and she goes back to the village, and she stays on the mission and everything. There's just so much going on with her that we would like to talk about, and we will.
Yeah. So, Nyasha's re-entry to like Zimbabwean society, is really interesting through the lens of Persepolis. Like, and this like ties into perspective because like as people who were impacted like by Marjane Satrapi's story in Persepolis, like that impact changed our current perspective on nervous conditions. So in Persepolis, after Marjane Satrapi returns to Iran, she's having a conversation with her friends, and they're talking about like relationships, and she says that she's had sex with multiple people, and her friends call her a whore. Then Nyasha on page 174. Hang on, I'm gonna pull it up, and I'll just quote it. Okay, thanks, Emily. On page 174, Nyasha says, "It happens. You get so comfortable and used to the way things are. Look at me now. I was comfortable in England, but now I'm a whore with dirty habits." And so she's talking about the way that like her shift in perspective, like as someone who lived in England for such a like important part of her childhood, like when she was shaped kind of into the person that she is, and like how she was like fit in probably pretty well with like society in England, and then coming back to Zimbabwe, like that perspective has shifted, especially like from her own dad, and then like as she's grown up. I think that's an interesting thing to talk about.
Yeah, I think that like something especially that's super interesting and difficult for her is that she's sort of like stuck in this mix of cultures because she's been moved so many times at a young age and has seen so many different perspectives. She's sort of stuck in this mix of like not being good enough for any of those cultures, so she tries to talk to the people at the mission school, and they just sort of like she's too much for them, or she like can't really communicate with them or
Like they
get
think
along
she's
with them.
annoying because of her slightly British accent.
Yeah. Yeah. And then like I can only assume in England, like she eventually assimilated, but like being from Zimbabwe, it's probably just like she never really fits in. So yeah, that's just, and even at the when she goes back to the village, she's just ridiculed by her family for not speaking the language anymore and for changing so much, when in reality it's just not her fault. It's all the moving perspectives around her.
And so I think part of having moved to England like opened Nyasha's mind to like so many different social issues. One thing that it talks about on page 146, it says, "This was the way Nyasha was, persistently seeing and drawing attention to things you would rather not talk about, shredding to bits with her sharp wit the things she thought we could do without, even if everybody else thought they were important." And I think that shows like how Nyasha is like so different from the rest of the characters in the book, and I think it's so interesting seeing her throughout Nervous Conditions. I like from the first time she was introduced, I was very drawn to her, like as a character, because I feel like when like for example when I hear about Baba Mukuru hitting Nyasha, I'm like offended, kind of like my own like better judgment is saying like this is bad and this is wrong. And I think like that is harder for people see if that's part of like your culture, if that's just like a thing that happens. Like, that's not a part of like our lives, and so that's not like a thing that we can just accept, right? And so then I think Nyasha sees that in a lot of things that like happen in Zimbabwe in a way that like doesn't resonate with other people. So Tambu says, people like me thought she was odd and rather superior in intangible ways. And I think that part of that is from like that kind of colonial mindset, where basically like the people, and throughout the book we see this, where people like especially in the mission school are kind of trained to believe that like white people and Western culture are superior to like Zimbabwean culture.
Yeah, for sure. And that's just like so devastating to see, just because they're like never even around that sort of culture. So why would you not just appreciate what you have? But yeah, it's just interesting, and especially seeing from our point of view, as like you were saying, like from a Western point of view, like we have to think especially hard to like sort of understand the perspective of Baba Mukuru, just because like, I mean, while we see him as this terrible person who's like beating his child, that's just something that's sort of like it has to be looked at both from our view and from the view of their culture, just as Hazel was saying.
And I think even just from like his specific, like their family culture is like Baba Mukuru is like
Right.
like God, and that's what we just talked about in our discussion, and that's what we've talked about in I think pretty much all of our discussions, is just the way that like he uses his education and his background to kind of justify doing basically whatever he wants and getting other people to listen to him. And so when Nyasha speaks up, like when inevitably she does because of her own background and the way that her brain has kind of formed, and like what she considers like important, when she speaks up, he's so offended at his core, right? Like that ruins his own identity.
Yeah, just because he's sort of like grown used to it, you know. So can we even almost like blame him at this point? Like it's just become part of him to be the best and the god.
Yeah. So I think that's so interesting, and that's what we've had a lot of fun thinking about and talking about. One thing that I thought was interesting in these pages were like the words that were used that I didn't know. Like I think there was a lot of new vocabulary, and I think that was interesting. Like from my perspective, that was like kind of shocking to hear new words that I hadn't heard before, because it made me feel like I wasn't like as smart or like as well informed kind of as Tambu was while she was writing these words, and it also kind of made me feel like out of the loop. So like to look up the words and to figure out the meaning, like that I think kind of ties you in to a book. And then like when there's like a word that's used, I don't know if you didn't know as many words as I didn't know.
I think I just skipped over them.
But like when there was a word that I didn't know and I looked it up, it made me feel so much more like connected.
Yeah.
And I feel like to be able to like have and find new vocabulary like through these books, I think that perspective ties into that a little bit, because it's like seeing someone else's like vocabulary and what they're using on like a real level, on like in like a way that makes sense.
For sure.
I feel like that like broadens your
and I think it's so humbling to like read that, and like especially not even just the vocabulary, just sort of like how like she's not really explaining anything about their culture, and that's like so like we have to make those inferences for ourselves, and if we were to like want to know more, then we would have to do our own research. Like it's just sort of like it's a very humbling thing to read about something that you don't really have any background information on. So it was just it made me sort of think about things more in a new way. So it's like not only showing us all the different perspectives, it's like changing our perspectives
Yeah.
too.
Word. Okay, we have 10 seconds left, so thank you so
you,
much
Miss
for
Stewart.
listening to our video, and we're so excited that you're watching it.
Like and subscribe.
Bye.